Hello, good morning. I'm Leslie. Today's video, I'm just gonna be talking and drawing. That's pretty much it. So if you're into that, please come along and draw with me. The main topics will be talking about the illustration I'm making, talking about an old YouTube project of mine, admitting to failure, and dealing with being late to start on things, and how that isn't always a bad thing. I'll be interspersing my illustration commentary as we chat when it's relevant to what's happening on screen, like right now. The supplies I'm using today are a Moleskine art sketchbook. The paper is different in a Moleskine art sketchbook than the plain notebooks. It's just thicker, and I find there's like less bleed. I'm using Isomar's acrylic ink, a dip pen. The nibs are just a random assortment that came with the pen. I think I used, it says size 003, and some paintbrushes. I think I also used a pencil and eraser and a Unipin fine line pen in 0.5. Here I'm just putting down a coat of masking tape so I have clean edges on the drawing when I'm finished. I do watch Draw With Me videos every now and then, and they usually have some of the following: ASMR, illustration tips or discussion of process, story times, and questions from viewers. Since this is my first go at a video like this, I'll do a little bit of each because they all sound fun, and then you can tell me what you liked best. We'll start with ASMR. The ASMR has been happening this whole time, believe it or not, but I'll take a moment for some gentle finger tapping. Okay. I wanted to kick the year off by making something relaxing to set the tone for myself, but also something new, a little bit challenging. So I decided to try to film a longer Draw With Me video. I've done a few quick reels of my sketches and process on Instagram, but I've been wanting to try making a longer one for a while now, so I can show more detail and talk a little bit more about what did and didn't work during the process, to also yap about whatever else I wanted to talk about. I am new to this, so if you have any feedback, feel free to leave it in the comments. I can't do too much about the equipment right now, so the video and sound quality probably won't be able to change too much, but if you have a suggestion, just let me know. I actually got all set up, but I had no ideas for what to draw, and I just sat there for like 10 minutes. But I finally decided on drawing the swan girl from the short animation I did a few weeks ago. I knew I wanted the composition to focus on her, so I just started sketching and feeling things out with her as my focal point. When I draw for myself, I don't usually plan things in advance, and this is a fatal flaw of mine. I know I should do thumbnails beforehand, but I kind of hate doing that, so I just jumped right in for this. A side note, I'm going to a sunset-themed party this weekend, so I wanted to do something beachy with my nails. I do my nails myself. They're gel press-ons. This is important just because I like nails. I used to do full gel sets, but I need short nails for work and sports sometimes, so I've switched to making my own press-ons for whenever I want fancy nails. I love them, but I think they've turned out looking like blisters, which I don't mind. I put tape over my nails though to protect them from ink stains. So this is just a tip for anyone with nice nails: wear gloves or cover them when working with art supplies that stain. For the story time section of this narration, one thing I wanted to talk about is that this is not my first time making a YouTube video, and You Can't Run Forever Darling is not the first animated project I've tried to put up. I'll talk about that in a second, but here is when I realized the pen did not fit in the inkwell, and I got very annoyed. It ended up being fine though. I just had to tilt the bottle sideways enough to kind of scrape the side of the bottle. Not ideal, but it worked. Because of that setback, I did end up trying out this brush first, with mixed results. Okay, back to my story. A few years ago, I was working on my own animated project that I still love and will finish one day. I wanted to make a YouTube animated miniseries, and it was going to be a musical with different styles of cartoon characters from different eras of filmmaking, which I think is literally there has been a pilot released on YouTube that is not similar, but the concept is the same in terms of style, which is pretty cool. Anyways, I figured I could make 3 episodes about 10 minutes long each by myself, which is a very bold goal. If you know anything about how long animation takes, well, you know. And the thing is, I also knew at the time how long animation took. I was just being very optimistic about my interest levels. I also thought it would be a great idea to make behind-the-scenes content that documented the journey of the creation of said miniseries, that I could make this and then release simultaneously to the making of the animation. And that was a very lofty goal. I was very new to creating behind-the-scenes content at the time. I still am, but it was much more difficult because I think I set a very high standard for myself in terms of production value. I think I've since learned that the easier it is to make something, the lower the barrier to entry, the better it is for me. I tend to hold on to stuff until I think it's perfect, and then nobody sees anything and I don't make anything. So by lowering my standards, I guess, I've actually found I've had more success because I can practice and make more things. I got started writing, doing character designs, and plotting this story while also planning what to film for the behind-the-scenes documentary style stuff. And I ended up finishing a short animated teaser, and I filmed the first video that would cover the planning and conceptualizing phase. And then I filmed and I edited it, and I even did little custom animation doodles to help illustrate my points. And to be honest, it wasn't that bad for a first try. So where is it? Why is it not up on this channel? It is gone because I took it down, and this will come as a complete surprise to no one, but I never finished that mini-series. I failed. I actually said something about how that video would keep me accountable, and that if I failed, it would be a public failure, but I'd have to get over it.
It means being comfortable with failing publicly and recognizing that failing would be okay. It just means I tried something new, and I'll learn a lot in the process regardless.
Ouch. First of all, I hate that haircut now. Secondly, I really did learn a lot in that process. It just really sucks to fail publicly. But frankly, I learned a lot from doing that, from that failure. My biggest takeaway from that whole project was working on failing and understanding how my motivation works. I think it's really important to take time to see how you deal with failure and if you are learning from it. Does the shame of failing cripple you? How do you move on? For me, the worst thing about that whole project was that I interviewed people for their insights into making indie animation, and I never actually ended up using the interviews because I never finished the project. So I feel really bad about that, for wasting their time. Shout out to John H. and the Nassau Rock team and Murphy and Champagne. I'm so sorry for wasting your time. I learned a lot from our interviews, so thank you so much for giving me that time and believing in me, even if I did not succeed. I didn't make it on that attempt, but I'm doing a lot better this time around. So what did I learn from that whole process? The negative parts were that I bit off more than I could chew. I have lots of experience organizing and managing teams, but what I didn't factor in was my own interest level. I'd scheduled myself to be working on that project basically 24/7 for months, even years, with no room to explore anything else. And when I get stuck on one project for too long, I start to go stir crazy. I want to experiment and try new things. I was also on the project alone, so I had no feedback or stimulation or encouragement. Basically, with no new input to inspire me, I lost interest in the project. There was no audience interaction, there was no way to sort of gauge what was working or not, and that's something that I realized was really necessary for me. A positive element of everything was that I realized in hindsight that I need that little push from outside forces. I used to be really proud of how independent I was, but at this point, I feel like why wasn't I just asking for help and saving time and energy? Like, yeah, I can do it alone, but like, why would I? When I could ask for help and get it done faster and at less of a personal cost, and also just have more fun doing it. And by help here, I kind of mean getting feedback, having people who are invested in the story and can actually talk to me about what's going on, what's working, what's not. Also, to quickly comment on the illustration that's happening right now, I'm using a brush that's been dipped in ink to pull brush strokes along in the direction of the hair growth to sort of simulate hair strands. It's just an easier way to add texture. When I started posting You Can't Run Forever, Darling in smaller, more manageable bite-sized pieces, I realized the missing piece for me was audience interaction. I needed to get the encouragement in order to feel motivated enough to stick with it. So my first YouTube attempt was a public failure, but here is my public rebirth. I've had plenty of failures and successes when it comes to artistic goals, so I wanted to share some thoughts on the new year and fostering creativity. I'm sure you are aware a lot of people make resolutions and use the new year as a way to kick things off, and I actually think that's really lovely. But unfortunately, sometimes missing the kickoff date of January 1st or messing up early can really throw you off. And that's partly why I didn't want to post this video on Jan 1. It's more relevant as like a follow-up. What happens when you make goals and mess up? What happens when you start late? In my experience, I find it works well for me to shorten the reset times on things. So instead of January 1, aka once a year being a reset point, I like to break the year down into even smaller pieces. So what about the first of every month as a reset point? Or every week, or even every day? Sometimes if I have a bad morning, the whole day can feel like a write-off. But by breaking my day up into like a morning, noon, and night checkpoint, it can help me to recalibrate and push forwards. The more chances I've given to myself to hit refresh and try again, the more I've succeeded. Otherwise, I tend to wallow in failure for far too long. Everyone's different, but if you're bummed out that your resolutions or goals have been thwarted already, just take stock, reevaluate what worked and what didn't, adjust if you need to, and try again. Consider this a little reset point if you like. I think setting goals or resolutions is important, but it's good to know what goals will help you. Getting better at art is pretty vague. What's the standard that you're judging by? This kind of loose goal can be helpful if you're a perfectionist who gets lost in the weeds of things and you need more freedom and less pressure. But setting a specific goal like, I will draw for 1 hour per week, or I'll draw 3 hand studies every day, that's like a really tangible way to track progress and to see improvement in a measurable way. I've set both kinds of goals over the years, and I think specific measurable goals work best for me. This year, one of my tangible art goals is to finish chapters 2 and 3 of You Can't Run Forever, Darling. One of my softer goals is to make artwork and sell it as prints. Another vague goal I've set for myself is to have more fun exploring art. That is super vague, and I think it's because I want it to stay really fun and flexible. I can sometimes suck the fun out of stuff by overcomplicating things. So for me, this goal is more of an encouragement to keep things fun, to learn more, to keep things smaller, more accessible, to try things in bite-sized pieces, exploring and playing with new media formats. I'm really excited to try lino cut printing at some point this year, and I also want to get back into embroidery. Trying things just because they seem fun, without trying to plan the hell out of them or to monetize them or to make them useful in some way. Ironically, You Can't Run Forever, Darling did start out as an artistic outlet, and it was supposed to be something that I did for fun on my own schedule, but I do think it's kind of grown on its own into its own thing, and I think that because of the audience, it now demands a more structured approach so that you can get more content delivered in like a timely fashion. And that's not a bad thing. I think it's natural and healthy, like as an evolution for that project. But as it does become more demanding and more structured, I think I need to find and make space for fun artistic pursuits that have no real goal. Just basically so I can make mistakes and it won't matter, and where I can just express myself. All artistic exploration will help your drawing or animation. You'll learn techniques or ways of seeing the world and you'll be able to apply that to your area of focus. And I think it's surprising the ways in which your fun exploration will guide and inform your structured work. A quick comment about the illustration. I really went in with the brush strokes on her hair, and at some point I forgot that she is supposed to be blonde. So she slowly began to have dark hair, and I just kind of rolled with it. This was around the point where I was like, she is no longer the swan girl. She is someone else with a different story. Okay. Let's answer some questions. These were questions that people sent in over Instagram. I didn't ask specifically for questions for this, but I think I had asked what topics should I cover in a video. So I'm going to answer some of those questions now. Someone asked, what was my path to making You Can't Run Forever, Darling? I actually do want to answer this one, but I think it will take a while, so I'll save it for like a full breakdown later on. I'd love to go over like each part of that in detail, but basically I was working on a lot of projects that were in early development, so no one sees that work. It's hard to be able to point to something and say like, hey, look, like this is what I've been spending a year of my life on. And that can be frustrating. Obviously, like you want to show what you do to other people. And when you're working for other people, they often get the final say on big decisions. So for me, You Can't Run Forever, Darling was a way to make something that I loved and that I was in charge of, while also being able to put it out there publicly so I could actually engage with an audience and show people my work. Someone else asked about the world building for You Can't Run Forever, Darling, and the creative process of designing it and the lore. I can't get too into it right now just because of spoilers, but the world building was and is an ongoing thing. So while there were things that I knew about the world from the jump, there were lots of small things that developed with the story. So as questions came up, answers were formed, and I keep a notebook and a Google Doc with all of the world building and lore notes as I go so I can track things. It's a bit gothic, it's a bit whimsical fantasy. I can see it as something of an Elseworld, so somewhat based on our reality with pretty key differences. I do think it's really fun to use our world as a jumping off point and then to add a lot of fantastical elements. Someone asked about things that inspire me. There's lots of things that I love that have like inspired my work. This, like, You Can't Run Forever, Darling was inspired by stuff like A Series of Unfortunate Events, Tim Burton, like Leica Studios works. They did Coraline and Paranorman and the Ghibli films. Like, Ghibli? I like all of those things. I think you can kind of see the influence in my work. Okay, someone asked about the thought process for my stories. I guess like I often start with a vision of a pivotal story moment or a concept like what would it be like to do home renos on a haunted mansion, and then I work outwards from there. I'll often keep a small notebook that is like idea specific, so I have a You Can't Run Forever, Darling notebook, and I write down notes and thoughts as I go, as well as sketches. And then once I've done enough material or got enough material to actually support a larger narrative, that's when I break out the bulletin board and the note cards and I start working on a timeline. Once I've got a timeline working, I'll start formatting it. So in the case of You Can't Run Forever, Darling, that means script writing and storyboarding. I could kind of go on and on about this, but maybe it's better saved for like a full video. Let me know if that's something you'd like to see. At this point in the illustration, I'm just using a brush with some of the ink diluted in water, and I'm just adding a little bit of tonal shading. And the nice thing about diluted ink is that you can build it up, so you can start light and then work in darker shades as you go. Someone asked about the story that inspired me to make You Can't Run Forever, Darling. I don't think there's any one story in particular, but it's kind of a combination of many things. I've mentioned this before, but it was originally inspired by like HGTV home renos. Ironically, like this is the one part that never made it to the final. So if you're interested in hearing the very first version of You Can't Run Forever, Darling, let me know in the comments and maybe I can do like a read through of my first script drafts and explain what changed and why. Someone asked, why do I like horror themes? I actually don't like horror that much. I enjoy thrillers and monster movies sometimes, but I don't like being scared. I like stories that delve into love and friendship and family, and I love adventure stories, and sometimes I think horror can be both. I like the horror stories that focus on the humanity of the characters and what haunts them. Like, I really liked Hill House, for example. I like a lot of Mike Flanagan stuff, but they don't seem like too horror to me, just because, like, yeah, there's ghosts, but it's mainly about a family coping with trauma. I also love hopeful stories, and in a weird way, I think horror or spooky stories can be surprisingly hopeful. They're like often about an underdog fighting against overwhelming odds, and at least like in my own writing, I hope that the characters can use their wits to outsmart adversity and overcome it in the end. Someone asked about advice on animation for people who want to start but don't know where to begin. That's a huge question and probably needs a whole video on its own, but I'll try to give a little bit of advice. People tend, in my opinion, people tend to talk about animation in two ways. One is the skill of creating the illusion of movement, whether by drawing things frame by frame or manipulating a model or whatever. And then two is the animation industry as a whole and the many jobs within that. So, for example, talking about You Can't Run Forever, Darling, if we talk about that as animation, like, yes, the miniseries involves animation, but it also requires writing and background art, design, editing, etc. So yeah, or it really depends on what you mean by animation. My advice on how to get started with animation, like the actual skill and art of animation, would be to look up tutorials on YouTube, check out books on animation, and like watch good animation. Go through videos frame by frame, get familiar with the terminology, and just build up knowledge about it. And then practice, practice, practice. I'll link a YouTube video that gives a great overview of the basics of animation that I've found very helpful when talking to new animators. There's also several distinct types of animation, and it's important for you to like choose the style that resonates most with you. There's traditional 2D animation, 2.5D puppet animation. That's what You Can't Run Forever, Darling is mostly. 3D animation and stop motion, like those are kind of your staples. That's what you'd see on TV and in film most of the time. Take a look into each of them, see which styles you like. They'll each have like their own pros and cons, and they'll each have a specific skill set that you'll have to develop and different programs that you'll need to use. So it's best to like start with one and then work out. A lot of people say to like start with animating a bouncing ball or a flour sack jumping around so you can learn basic principles, and I think you will learn a lot through that, but it can be a bit boring and might turn you off. So don't be discouraged. If you're the kind of person who is motivated more by making cool stuff, find a compromise where you can learn through doing something that you think is cool. Just keep it simple to start with. There's a reason people usually start with a bouncing ball, just because then you're actually focusing on the movement, not illustrating one frame. That's a really big key difference in like, I think how new animators might think of animation. That's a generalization, but you don't like, animation is not one pretty frame. That's an illustration. Animation is actually like the rough movement, the flow of the drawings. So don't think about one pretty image, think about how the thing moves. If you want more info on animation industry jobs, start looking at behind the scenes videos of your favorite animated films, search for interviews with animation artists or directors that you like, and see what jobs and departments they speak about. Art books for animated films are another great resource. Once you get to know what you're interested in, it'll be easier to focus your learning and practice on honing that skill. If you'd like a full video with more info on how myself or others got into the industry, let me know. I could also do a video that breaks down some of the jobs within the animation industry. Again, if that's something you'd be interested in, just let me know in the comments. Lastly, there is no substitute for practicing. I started animating by making little flip books in my textbooks at school. Nowadays, digital is just faster and more efficient, and there are a lot of programs available. Industry standard programs are going to cost money, but your artistic pursuits are a worthwhile investment. I wouldn't let that stop you. But there are also some apps that are free. I personally use Toon Boom, but that's on the more expensive side, and using it has more to do with just the sheer amount of time I've already spent working with that program. I just know it the best out of all of the programs. And that's for 2.5D animation primarily. In the illustration right now, I'm adding in some cross-hatching. I wanted the background to kind of look like trees, but as I went, I just kept realizing this is not working. So what I ended up doing is adding an ink wash over top, just to tone it down even darker and push it further into the background. Someone asked, what do I enjoy the most about drawing? I really like surprising myself. I don't always see the end illustration clearly. This illustration that I'm working on now is actually a great example of that. I changed it partway through. It didn't come out how I envisioned it all. I'll often have ideas, but as I draw, I discover parts of the drawing as I make it, and that's always fun. I think with work or professional art, you do have to do so much pre-planning. So if I draw for myself, I like to let the drawing kind of take me on its own little journey. And speaking of changes, these swans in the background were just not it for this. I don't know why. So I did some wet on wet ink just to add some cloud textures. And I decided to put in a constellation after thinking for a long time about what I could add into the background just to put a point of interest there. Someone asked about my habits. I gym pretty regularly. I think that's a big habit of mine. I think it's really important to watch out for your physical health. I feel like every artist says this, but drawing is a physical job. You need to look after your body so you don't end up with wrist or back problems. It's a real thing that can force you to take time away from doing what you love. So stretch, lift weights, all of that stuff. I got another question about my schedule. My schedule changes quite drastically. Often, every couple weeks, I'll just change things up. Not for any real reason, but maybe just because work, or I have to focus on getting something done for a deadline, and it will just throw off my whole thing. But yeah, I think because it's the start of the year and because I had a hard reset thanks to jet lag, my current schedule feels very healthy. I don't know how long it's gonna last, but right now my weekdays are kind of I wake up at 8 a.m., I go for a run, I come home and I stretch, I shower, make breakfast, all that stuff. And then I've been trying to implement a time for spiritual growth and personal growth. So I'll spend 15 minutes doing some reading or a liturgy, which is formal poetic prayer, and maybe journaling, stuff like that. And then I get to work. My work time encompasses freelance jobs and You Can't Run Forever Darling stuff, YouTube stuff. I really think it's important to prioritize your own creative endeavors. It is work. It is real work. You should consider it real work. I think that's always been a huge struggle for me, but it's something that I'm working on, is prioritizing my projects. But yeah, I work until maybe 2 p.m., then I go to the gym, lift weights, then I come back and work again until I go to bed at midnight. I really prioritize my work these days. So during the weekdays, I don't really do anything other than working and gymming, and that's how I like it, to be honest. I'm a bit of a recluse. I go out on the weekends and stuff, but weekdays I tend to really zone in on what I'm doing. I also feel my sleep schedule is actually kind of on a 2-day split. So first night I'll sleep a solid 8 hours, but then the next night I might just be hyper focused on something and stay awake till 4. So yeah, I think I kind of go back and forth between 4 and 8 hours of sleep. Yeah, I'm in this really great phase of life where I have no dependence and very few responsibilities outside of myself. So I can dedicate myself to career and art, and I love that. While I was taking off the masking tape, I realized it was really stuck on there, so the paper is actually ripping off as well. So next time, note to self, use painter's tape. Someone asked about the story of the character that I am currently drawing, like in this video. Yeah, I mentioned she started as the swan girl from the short animation I recently posted, but it's kind of morphed into this sort of a Nosferatu themed image. The constellation behind her is Cassiopeia. I don't know why, that constellation holds a special place in my heart. And that is actually the end of this Draw With Me video. The illustration is done. It did not come out at all like what I thought it would, but I don't hate it. I love the fabric folds. If you've heard of the artist Chris Riddle, the folds here actually kind of remind me of his style. I really liked his work growing up. I didn't actually spend that much time talking about the illustration itself, but hopefully that's okay. Thanks for joining me. It was a joy. I hope the year ahead of you feels full of promise and that you give yourself the grace to fail well. And if you don't, that you are surrounded by friends who will help you back up. Thanks for watching.